They say patience is a virtue. Well, yes, maybe, but how long can you be virtuous while you're being quietly chewed to pieces? While you get up every day and think, am I even living for me or am I living for them? Here I've lived for them. And that's it. I've never been one to pound my fist on the table. All my life I've been comfortable. For my husband, for my kids, for my parents, for my mother-in-law. That's how it's done, isn't it? A woman's supposed to be soft, easygoing. And I was like that. Silent when I wanted to shout. Smiled when I wanted to turn around and walk away. You're a mother, a wife, a daughter. How can you only think about yourself? I heard that voice in my head every time I just wanted to tell everyone to go to hell.
Thank you for watching my channel. I create videos for your enjoyment. Please subscribe if you want to support my efforts, it's very important to me. I apologize in advance for any mistakes, dubbing is done by neural network. Please point out mistakes in the comments so I can correct them.
But when you put up with it for too long, one day there comes a day when even a small spark starts a fire. And I had that spark not too long ago. I remember it was an ordinary evening. My husband, as always, was sitting on the couch staring at the phone, the kids were yelling from their room, and I was standing in the kitchen cooking dinner, as robots are programmed to do their program. And then my mother-in-law calls. The eternal mother-in-law. And what do you think? Not to say hello, not to ask how I'm doing, but to say, I did something wrong again. And you know what she said? You don't know how to do anything. You can't even keep your own house properly. Look how other women live. That was the thing that turned everything upside down. That's when something burst inside me. For 20 years I had endured these humiliations, accusations, claims both from my mother-in-law, and from my husband, and even from my own children, who simply began to perceive me as furniture. I thought it was no longer possible to live like this. No, I didn't just think, I knew. Because if I didn't change something right now, I wouldn't live another 20 years for them. And you know what the most frustrating part is? None of them even noticed I was dying. They didn't care. So I decide enough is enough. I gather them all around the table and I tell them what's on my mind. No more smiles, no more compromises. Let them know what I think. They never realized that I was human too. To them, I was just a background without which they wouldn't have noticed they lived in this house. But even the background can fade if no one notices. After that conversation with my mother-in-law, I couldn't calm down. I was literally shaking. I remember standing at the stove and going over in my head all their words, all their rebukes. It was like every comment they made was sticking into my brain like little needles. Are you tired? You're a housewife, how hard can it be? Why is it so dirty? You stay at home all day, you have nothing to do. When are you going to do something serious? Have you ever thought that you're just lazy? Lazy? I'm like a squirrel in a wheel. Only instead of nuts, endless duties that do not please anyone. And most importantly, there's zero gratitude. Absolutely zero. The catalyst was one incident that changed everything. My oldest daughter came home from college and sat down at the table as usual without saying a word. I made dinner, put the plate in front of her, and she didn't even look at me. Just picked up her fork and without taking her eyes off the phone said, "What is this? You couldn't do something normal?" That's when I realized I was losing not only myself but my children. They see me as a woman who can be neglected, who will never say she's hurt, that she's offended. I was their shadow, their attendant. Even the children I raised thought that was the way it was supposed to be. So what to do about it? Sit back and continue to be silent? No, I'm not going to do it anymore. And so I decided that's it. I'm getting everyone together. My husband, my kids, my mother-in-law, everyone. I want them to hear that I'm not a robot. That I have feelings, I have a life. And I'm not gonna live it for them anymore. Have you ever looked at your family and thought, these are my closest people? And I'd look at them and think, I'm so sick of all of you. I decided to get them all together at the same table. Just like you do when you have something important to talk about. But this was not a family conversation, not a peaceful discussion, but rather a trial, with me as the prosecutor. And even though they weren't expecting anything like this, I knew I couldn't escape this moment. I couldn't stay silent any longer. When everyone was seated, I looked around. Husband, children, mother-in-law. No one suspected anything. So I began. You probably think this is just an ordinary dinner, don't you? You'd be wrong. I've gathered you here to finally tell you what I think. Because I'm not going to stay silent any longer. My husband looked at me in surprise. He clearly didn't expect this start. Do you know how many times I have endured your reproaches? How many times you've walked past me like I was just a piece of furniture? And how many times I've tried to get you to notice me? I'm tired. Tired of you ignoring me. Of everyone and everything being more important to you than me. He tried to say something, but I held up my hand. Wait, that's not all. You've always been somewhere far away. Even when you're home, you're gone. And I'm not talking about when you were at work. No. I'm talking about those nights when you're sitting on the couch with your phone and I'm making dinner. I'm talking about the nights you lay next to me but didn't notice me. I'm talking about how I always needed more than you gave me but you didn't see it. Because to you, I'm just part of the house. He lowered his head but didn't say a word. I knew there was a storm inside him right now, but I didn't care anymore. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being the one who's only remembered when something's wrong. And now they're finally going to hear me. Then I turned to my mother-in-law and, oh yeah, this was the conversation I've been looking forward to the most. Do you know what it's like to clench your teeth every time she calls? Listening to her perpetual rebukes, comparisons to perfect daughters-in-law, and advice you didn't ask for? Now imagine putting up with that for years. But not today. Today she's going to hear the whole truth. I turned to my mother-in-law, who sat with her head held high. Surely, she thought, this was just another family meeting where she would once again show how she had it right, and how her son had gotten it with his wife. But not this time. You think I don't know how you talk about me behind my back? I began calmly but with a challenge in my voice. You think I don't hear you discussing me with your friends, with your neighbors, with anyone who wants to listen? My mother-in-law squinted, as if she didn't know what I was getting at. Yeah, go ahead, play your favorite game of I didn't say anything. Now listen to me carefully. You spent all these years trying to get into my life, into our marriage. You wanted me to be whatever you wanted me to be. Always ready, always patient, always silent. But you know what? I'm not going to play by your rules anymore. She exhaled sharply, but I continued without letting her get a word in edgewise. You were always trying to prove that I wasn't worthy of your son, that I wasn't good enough for him. And you asked yourself, why should I be perfect for him when he's not even half trying to be what I deserve? You put him on a pedestal like he's perfect and I'm trash at his feet. And it's been like that from the beginning. You've tried to make me feel like I'm nothing. But I'll tell you this now, you don't get to tell me what to do anymore. And for the future, don't come to my house again. You're not family to me anymore. My mother-in-law looked like she'd just been splashed with cold water. She clearly didn't expect to hear that. Her eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to say something, but I interrupted her. I will no longer listen to your insults, your advice, or your attempts to make me into someone I never was and never will be. You always thought you could control our lives because you were mom and I had to obey. But now you're just going to be a guest in my life. Well, no. You won't be a guest anymore. She was furious. As soon as I finished speaking, she jumped up and hissed. How dare you talk to me like that? I've done everything for you. I always wanted what was best for you. You're just ungrateful. I grinned. Oh, that's your favorite phrase, isn't it? I wanted what was best. But best for who? For you? For him? Certainly not for me. You've always been here just to put me in my place. And frankly, I'm tired of your presence. So go on, get up and leave. And don't come back. The mother-in-law, trembling with anger, grabbed her bag and, glaring at her husband, left the room. The husband said nothing. He sat quietly, as if he was still digesting my speech. But I didn't give him time to come to his senses. Sometimes you have to cut toxic people out of your life. Even if it's your husband's mother. And you know what? Feels good. I turned to the kids who sat wide-eyed, clearly not expecting me to continue in the same vein with them. Kids are sacred, right? But what if your kids start seeing you as furniture? As something to be taken for granted? They don't even realize they've become part of the problem too. And how do you talk to them when they don't realize they're losing their mother too? I took a deep breath and turned to the children, who clearly weren't prepared for the uncomfortable conversation awaiting them as well. And now you. Yes, don't be surprised, you're in this too. Because you, my dears, all these years have benefited from my kindness, my tolerance and my care. I am a handy mom to you who will always do, always help, always have your back. But tell me, when was the last time you even asked me how I was feeling? They looked at each other, clearly not understanding what I meant. I'm not saying you had to take care of me every day. But when was the last time you showed even basic gratitude? When did you ever think that your mom has feelings too? She has her own desires, her own dreams? Or do you think my only mission in life is to serve you? One of them, the eldest son, tried to object. Mom, you always do everything yourself. We didn't ask you to. Exactly. You didn't ask, but you always knew what I would do. Because you're used to me being your personal housekeeper who's always on hand. But you know what? From this day forward, everything's gonna change. No more favors for nothing. If you want something, you learn to do it yourself. Because I'm not gonna live for you anymore. I'm a human being too. When you realize that your own children have become the ones who don't appreciate you, that's probably one of the biggest wounds. After all, you've invested your soul in them for so many years, and all you got in return was indifference. My older son looked at me with incomprehension. He thought it was just another conversation that could be ignored, that everything would be back to normal in a couple days. But I could see in his eyes that he didn't yet realize how seriously things had changed. And neither did his sister. Anya. I turned to my daughter. Remember that time you came home and just threw your backpack on the floor without even saying hello? You probably weren't paying attention, but then you said one phrase that stuck in my head. You said, "It's that food again. Can't you cook something normal?" That's when I realized that to you, I'm not a mother but a cook. She looked at me, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, I was just tired. You know how hard it is to study. Oh, of course, I interrupted her. I hear that every time. Anya is tired, Anya has problems, Anya has exams. And Mom doesn't have problems, does she? I'm always in the background. You think I don't notice how you treat me? You forget I'm human. And you know what the most frustrating part is? I don't expect you to do anything. Just a simple thank you. Just a simple thank you once in a while. But no, you take me for granted. Mom's always here, she'll always do it. But from today, Anya, everything is going to change. I will no longer do anything I don't deserve. She froze, clearly not expecting such words from me. No, I interrupted her again. No more excuses. You've grown up. And it's time you realize that nothing in life is for nothing. And I'm no exception. If you want me to be your support, you have to learn to respect me. Otherwise, I'm sorry, I'll just stop being the person you always thought I was. Anya was silent. Her face was reddening, but she didn't say a word. I knew I'd hit the mark. Sometimes the truth hurts, but you can't change things without it. And they needed to hear the truth. Every one of them. Now it was the turn of the youngest son, Max. Max, you think this doesn't concern you? I turned to him. You've always been the quiet one. You think you're not part of the problem? You're wrong. You've been used to your mom deciding everything for you since you were a kid. Like she ordered it for you. But it doesn't work that way. You also have to realize that I'm not just someone who's always there for you, but someone who can get tired. You know what the sad part is? I've never heard you say thank you. Not once. Max straightened up, clearly not expecting the conversation to reach him. Mom, it just never occurred to me that you were expecting it. Exactly, I interrupted him. It never occurred to me. It did. And every time you asked or did something, I waited for at least a hint of recognition. But there wasn't. From now on, Max, you're going to learn to be on your own. Because I'm not going to solve your problems anymore. He opened his mouth to say something but changed his mind. There was a heavy silence in the air. I watched them slowly realize what was happening. Yes, it was painful for them. But it was even more painful for me all these years. And finally, I could feel myself getting lighter. As if a weight I'd been carrying for too long was being lifted off my shoulders. There are moments when you just have to say, enough is enough. And here I am standing in front of them and I feel like that moment has come. I took a deep breath and looked around the table at everyone. My husband was silent. The kids sat there not knowing what to do. I knew it was a shock to them. They had never seen me like this before. But I didn't care. Because I was no longer going to be the person they always thought I was. Everything I said wasn't just words. I meant it. I'm no longer going to be the mother, wife and daughter-in-law you used to see me as. From now on, I'm living my life for me. And if anyone doesn't like that, the door is over there. You can get up and leave. Because I'm not going to accommodate you anymore. The husband got up first. His face was red with shame or anger, I don't know. But he didn't say a word. He just walked silently to the door, grabbed his jacket and walked out, slamming the door. I didn't think it would take him this long to realize I wasn't his shadow anymore. I could feel the air in the room change. Each of them realized that this wasn't a joke. That things were different now. The mother-in-law, of course, was the most persistent. She always was. She never gave up without a fight, always tried to get the upper hand, but now I was ready for her final move. And this time I didn't care what she had to say. Her mother-in-law stood up slowly, as if she hoped her determination could still turn the tide. Her gaze was prickly, looking at me as if I were a rebel who dared to disrupt her long-established order of things. "You were never worthy of my son," she began, taking a step toward the door. "I always knew you weren't strong enough to be a good wife. He deserves better, not someone like you. Everything you've done today is just proof of your weakness. You're just an ungrateful girl who couldn't even keep a family together." I grinned. So many years of her trying to break me, and here she thinks her last words will hurt me? No, not this time. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said it calmly. "You still think I'm the problem. But the truth is, I'm not going to be a part of your perfect family world anymore. You can think whatever you want. You can think I'm a bad wife or mother. But that's your problem. I don't need your approval anymore. And I won't live by your rules anymore." She wanted to say something else, but I held up my hand to stop her. "Get out of my house," I said coldly. "And don't come back." My mother-in-law gave me one last sizzling glare and walked out with her lips pressed together. I heard the door slam. And in that moment I felt that the first chain that had bound me for years had finally broken. Sometimes the hardest part is getting rid of the people who hurt you the most, but cover themselves with caring and good intentions. But when that happens, you start to really breathe. I turned to the kids. They were silent, trying to comprehend what had just happened. It was clearly hard for them to realize that this wasn't all just a burst of emotion, that their lives were going to change from this day forward. But I knew it was necessary for them to. When you start to shatter all the established expectations, it's always a shock. But sometimes you have to tear everything down to the ground to build something new. I looked at my children again. They sat there as if frozen in anticipation of what I was going to say next. "You probably think everything will be back to normal in a day or two, don't you? But I'll tell you honestly, no, it won't. I'm not the one who's going to do everything for you anymore. I am no longer the one who will turn a blind eye to your grievances and neglect." My daughter Anya, still in shock, tried to say something. "Mom, well, you always did that, you are." "Exactly," I interrupted her. "I always did, but it was my mistake. I let you think it would always be like that. But that's all changed now. From now on, I'm going to take care of myself. And if you want to be in my life, you're going to have to rethink the way you treat me. I'm no longer your servant or your silent support. I'm a human being too. And I'm not going to take it anymore." Max, the youngest son, tried to object. "But Mom, we're a family." "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "Family is not something that just exists by default. A family is people who support and respect each other. And we didn't have that. And if you want our family to continue to exist, you're going to have to change. Otherwise, I'm going to cut you out of my life like I did the others." I could see the fear and incomprehension mingling on their faces. To them, I had always been the unwavering mother who would do anything and forgive anything. But now they saw me differently. And that was the first step to change. Sometimes you have to break things so they realize you have boundaries too. And even though it's painful, you can't move on without it. I stood up, getting ready to leave the room. "If you have something to say it now. If not, then leave this room and think about what you really want." They remained silent. I knew they needed time to realize that I was no longer going back to the life they thought was the norm. I headed for the exit, leaving them alone with their thoughts. Have you ever felt the silence start to weigh on you? That's how it felt the moment I left the room. I left them to digest everything I'd said. But I realized that the silence was just the calm before the storm. I walked out into the kitchen, where I could still smell the smell of unfinished dinner. I looked around the room. Familiar surroundings, the same table where we'd eaten as a family so many times, but this house seemed different now. It was as if I'd finally taken it over. It was my home now, and no one else could consider it theirs without my consent. I poured myself a glass of water and heard footsteps behind me. It was Max. He came to the door and stopped, hesitant to come in. "Mom," he said quietly, clearly afraid to break the fragile silence. "Are you serious? Do you really want us to leave?" I looked at him over my shoulder. He was still a kid in my eyes, but at the same time I realized that he needed to be taught adult things. "Max, I don't want you to leave," I said calmly. "I want you to finally realize that I need more than just physical help. I need respect. I need you to start to realize that I'm not just a mom who will always be here. I'm a person, and I'm tired of being taken for granted." He took a step forward but stopped. I knew this was hard for him to accept, that it was a blow to him. "But you can't just cut us out of your life, can you?" he asked, trembling slightly. "I'm not throwing you out. I'm giving you a chance to change the way you feel about me. But if you won't change, then I can't go on living like this. You have to realize that everything up to this point is over. Sometimes you can't go on living your old way, even if it means ruining everything." And here I am standing in front of my own son, and I see his eyes full of confusion. He never thought his world could turn so drastically upside down. Max looked at me as if he hoped this was all just a burst of emotion, that in a couple days I'd change my mind and take it all back. But I knew I'd already gone too far, and there was no going back. "Either you start respecting me as a person," I said firmly, looking him straight in the eye, "or I'm no longer a part of your life. I can't just be a shadow that you only notice when you need something." He was silent, and I could see his thoughts racing. I didn't expect him to understand instantly, but I wanted the idea that I wasn't someone to be disregarded to take root in him. He started, but hesitated. "I'll try, Mom. But it's so strange, you've always done everything for us." "Exactly," I interrupted him gently. "But now it's time for you to start doing something for me. Just at least respect me as a woman, as someone who is entitled to her boundaries and her feelings." He nodded, though he didn't fully understand everything I'd said. But it was a start. He turned around and walked slowly toward the door. I knew he needed time. When you change the rules of the game, it's scary. People don't realize right away that things have really changed, but when it gets to them, they either leave or stay with you on the new terms. When Max left, I went back to the table where only Anya remained. She sat with her lips pressed together and looked at me defiantly. "What now?" she asked sharply. "Do you think we're all just going to change?" I grinned but answered calmly. "No, I don't expect you to change overnight. But I'm not going to put up with the way things used to be anymore. You're a grown-up girl, Anya. And if you want to live with me under the same roof, you'll have to accept that I have the right to my own life and respect too. And if that's too hard for you, you know where the door is." Her eyes glittered with anger, but she remained silent. I knew she needed time to realize it, just like Max did. "All right," she said quietly, standing up. "I'll think about it." She turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the silence. I heard the door slam behind her. It wasn't goodbye forever. It was goodbye to those old relationships that were dragging me down. If they want to come back into my life, they're going to have to accept new rules. When you let go of people who no longer bring you happiness, life becomes easier. Seems scary at first, but then a sense of freedom sets in. And here I am finally alone in my house. My family can still come back, but only if they're willing to start fresh. I sat down at the table, and for the first time in a long time I felt like a heavy burden had been lifted off of me. The house was quiet, but this silence was different. It was no longer oppressive. It was a silence of freedom. A silence in which I could finally hear myself. I didn't know what my future would look like. Maybe my family would come back to me someday with a different attitude. Or maybe they wouldn't. But it was my choice now. You can only live for others until it starts to kill you from the inside out. But when you finally choose to live for yourself, you realize that only then do you begin to truly breathe. That day was the beginning of a new life for me. A life where there was no more room for those who disrespected me.